In this video for section 13.2, we're going to talk about a new type of test called the chi-square test for independence, or Minitab will call it the chi-square test for association. This test is used to test claims about whether there is a relationship between two qualitative variables. You might remember from the very beginning of Stats 1 the difference between qualitative and quantitative variables. Qualitative variables are categories, or words, and quantitative variables are numbers with units. So when we're doing things like finding the mean and the standard deviation, we're working with quantitative data because those are numbers. Qualitative variables are responses that are words. So when we're doing the chi-square test for independence, these are our null and alternative hypotheses. The null hypothesis is that the two variables are independent, or in other words, there is no relationship between the two. The alternative hypothesis is that the two variables are not independent. And so, in other words, we have evidence that there is a relationship. So the word not, again, is found in the alternative hypothesis. So very important that you're getting the correct null and alternative hypothesis for this test. So let's look at an example. We have this situation where we have a business that takes photographs for college yearbooks, and they're developing a survey. And the survey is asking about photography and publishing activities associated with yearbook development. They want to know whether college funding source and gender of the yearbook editor are related in some manner. So they're asking about the gender of the yearbook editor, and they're asking about whether the university is a private or state university. And then they're putting the data together into this contingency table. So there are 4 categories here. Each university surveyed is going to fall into one of these 4 categories, depending on these 2 variables, gender of the yearbook editor and source of funding. So we want to test whether there's a relationship between these 2 variables, and we're going to use a 0.05 alpha, or level of significance. So of course we're going to start with our null and alternative hypotheses. So our null hypothesis is going to be that the gender of the yearbook editor and the funding source are independent. Or in other words, there's no relationship. And then our alternative hypothesis is going to be that gender of the editor and the funding source are not independent. So there is a relationship between the gender of the editor and the funding source. So I can see from looking at my table that it looks like there is a relationship there because it seems that at private universities, the yearbook editors are much more likely to be female than male, whereas at state universities, they're more likely to be male than female. But we're going to do our test just to be sure here. So we're going to go to Minitab. And what I need to do first in Minitab is I need to put this table, my data table, into the Minitab spreadsheet. Now on the homework problems, of course, you're going to be able to copy and paste this table. It's not going to take me too long to type up. So I'm going to enter my column headings of gender, private, and state. And then I'm going to, in the gender column, I have my row labels of male and female. And then I'm going to enter the numbers into each of the 4 cells. Now I'm not going to enter the totals. You can see in this table I have the totals along the bottom. I'm not going to enter those in Minitab. I'm just going to enter the 4 cells that have the data that I need. So I do not enter row or column totals. Now, once I have that entered, I'm going to go to Stat and go down to Tables and select the chi-square test for association. I'm going to change this drop-down to Summarize Data in a two-way table. And then I'm going to put the columns containing the table into this box. And so that's going to be the private and the state columns. Now, I can add labels to the table. I don't need to, but I can if I want to. And the labels for the table are in the gender column because it's the gender column that labels the rows, male and female. So I'm going to select that. And then once I have that all done, click OK. And here are my results. So what Minitab is going to do is it's going to recreate the table here. And you can see that it recreates the table and it also creates it with the total row and column totals as well. So I have the table here, and then I'm going to continue scrolling, and I see the chi-square test results. So when I'm doing the chi-square test, I'm looking for the Pearson value, not the likelihood ratio. So ignore that second row. It's always kind of going to be a close value to the Pearson value, but not quite the same. So my Pearson value is 76.168, and then my p-value is 0.000. And of course, p-value is what we use to determine if we reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis. So I'll move this out of the way. So my chi-square value, again, you're going to need to put that into the homework. And then my p-value of 0.000. And so comparing that to my alpha of 0.05, p is less than alpha. So I can reject the null hypothesis. And so what that tells me is that I have evidence for the alternative hypothesis. I have evidence that the gender of the editor and funding source are not independent, or that there is a relationship between them.